Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rae, and my pronouns are she and her. Just a quick reminder, the panel will be best viewed in speaker view on Zoom. As Adrian mentioned, I'm going to be facilitating the allyship panel today. Allyship is a really important component of a more inclusive and equitable workforce. It's essential to creating an environment where everyone feels heard and respected. Allyship is also critical to achieving a more equitable workplace for women. To quote
Oh, I think, Rae, you want to mute.
You went on mute. We lost you. There you go.
Yeah. All right, so I'll go back a little bit. So allyship is critical to achieving a more equitable workplace for women. In a 2018 Harvard Business Review article, they talk about evidence showing that men who are deliberately engaged in gender inclusion programs, their organizations see progress 96% of the time. But when men are not engaged, their organizations only see progress 30% of the time. So all of us, women and allies, need to be part of the solution to gender inequality. And that's why we've chosen allyship as the theme for today's panel. So before we meet the panelists, I wanted to take a few minutes to go over a couple of terms you see on the slide here. So first, what is an ally? We're using a definition here from Cherie Atchison. So an ally is any person that actively promotes and aspires to advance the culture of inclusion through intentional, positive, and conscious efforts that benefit people as a whole. And then there's the concept of allyship. When we talk about allyship, we're talking about a continuous process where one educates themselves on a marginalized group's experiences, empathizes with them, and then develops relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with that group. Couple of points we wanted to make here. Allyship is proactive, right? That's why we're calling it active allyship. So it's not just about saying, not saying the wrong thing, it's about doing the right thing. And it requires recognizing bias in the moment and reacting to stop it. And also identifying situations that'll be prone to bias and putting in place processes and systems to disrupt that. Allyship is not self-defined. So in other words, the work and efforts must be recognized by those you are seeking to ally with. I don't decide I'm an ally, the members of the group I'm seeking to ally with do. And then finally, just emphasizing again that allyship is ongoing. This is illustrated by the graphic on the left here. You can think of allyship more like an infinite process, like a circle, rather than a straight line to achieving an end state. It requires intention and development, like any skill. So we've listed some additional resources on the next slide, such as the Better Allies newsletter. This emails out 5 tips to be a better ally every Friday. It's a great way to practice the continual learning of allyship. We've also included a short 12-minute video from Lean In on some of the common biases women face at work, and a link to the recently released 2021 Women in the Workplace study that Amber mentioned earlier is included here as well. The study includes details on the importance of allyship, the current state of women in the workplace, and ways to improve inclusion and equity for women. And we will provide these links after the event if you'd like to learn more. So now that we've discussed what we mean when we talk about allyship and some resources, let's meet our panelists for today. And while we're kind of Brady bunching up here on the screen, we've invited all these panelists because they have each demonstrated a commitment as active allies in their own companies and in the profession more broadly. So I'd like to start out by having each of them introduce themselves. So panelists, if you could share your name, designation, how long you've been in the industry, and maybe a little bit about why you think there's a need for NAWA. So I'll go ahead and start with Yvonne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rae. Hi, everybody. My name is Yvonne Palm. I'm a fellow of the CAS and also a fellow of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries in the UK. I've worked in the industry for over 15 years now in consulting and insurance company environment. And I've worked in the US, in the UK, and now I'm here in Nigeria where I have a Pan-African role. So I really consider myself to be an international actuary. In terms of the need for NAWA, I think it'll be great as a support network for women who are analytical, and also a way to reach our more analytical male counterparts who indeed can be our allies, as we've been talking about. As actuaries, most of us have worked in male-dominated workplaces and probably have had to make adjustments to try and fit in. I know for myself, when I worked in the US, for example, I remember having to follow American football, even though I did not like it at all. And that's just because if I didn't, I wouldn't be included in the conversations. And I know when I moved to the UK, I was a bit older and wiser. And yes, the culture was different as well. But when people talked about football or soccer, as Americans call it, I was better able to voice up and say that maybe we should talk about something else that's more inclusive. But if you do try that, be warned, people will ask you, like what? So do have in your back pocket something interesting, like an interesting article you've read or news or something like that. So I think it would be nice to have a space like that so that younger up and coming actuaries can learn from people who have gone through that so they don't have to experience the same thing. And then also, I think it would be a great place of support for more experienced female actuaries and other analytical professionals. So usually to get to a position of management, many women have had to learn traits that they usually cherish for, in their male counterparts and treated as leadership qualities. But then when a woman displays some of these, sometimes she's thought of as aggressive, loud, abrupt, or some other name I can't mention in this seminar. But, me personally, I know I was told a lot that, oh, your emails are harsh. And I didn't even know what that meant. My emails are harsh, but I saw other people, when my male counterparts sent similar emails, nobody said anything like that to them. And I was always confused. But it really wasn't until another senior female said to me, no, your emails are not harsh, you're just direct. That sort of clicked. And it made me realize that actually I don't really have to mull around and think so hard to change myself. It's actually just how people are viewing me. I mean, I did change a few things. I did start saying hi, I hope you're doing well, before I get into my business. But I think it's nice to have a space like that where you can learn from other senior women, and also from men as well. It's not just for women, but it's also nice to have it from people who understand your work environment and know how things work in your industry.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. Ari, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, and thanks for having me. Ari Moskowitz, I'm COO and Chief Pricing Actuary at Everest Reinsurance. Been in the industry for about 15 years now. I think jumping right to where NAWA plays in and where there's a need, I think I'll rewind the tape not 6 months ago to when NAWA started, but 7 months ago when I was trying to arrange an internal seminar at Everest, which we do on an annual basis for our actuaries. And I wanted to have a panel discussion where we were going to bring representatives from the industries and various diversity related groups, and reaching out with various folks between IABA, OLA, and Saga just launched shortly thereafter. And I could not find a women's network. And it was a bit surprising, I suppose, for 2021. I think it's important, and especially for me when I reflect on my own journey towards what I hope and view as allyship. It is a journey, there is learning, and a lot of that comes through conversation and investigation and understanding. And sometimes it means someone needs to start the dialogue, because not everyone's going to be courageous enough to start it on their own. And that means there needs to be a spark. And better late than never, that's the bottom line. And that goes the same thing. I'm glad to see there's other he/hims on the call. That level of allyship that could be added and joining along, I think is extremely critical. And something that creates that dialogue, it only ends up in a better place. So again, I know there were a bunch of other questions, but I forgot them, I'll be honest.
No, that's great. Thanks. So Tonya, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Rae. So I'm Tonya Manning. I'm a pension actuary based in North Carolina. So I was remote before remote was a thing. But I work for an international company that's based in New York City, Buck Global. And I have been volunteering in the profession since the ink was still wet on my FSA certificate, and actually before then. So I've been volunteering for over 20 years. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. And why we need NAWA is, why do we need women working together? I am such a big big advocate for women supporting other women. And I think I put this in my bio, but one of my favorite quotes was in an advertisement from a designer celebrating the win by Billie Jean King and getting equal pay for women in the sport of tennis. And their tagline was, "She wins, we win." And I think what we need to do is make sure we're all supporting each other, women and allies alike, to make sure that we're promoting and supporting women to achieve success, however they want to achieve success. Through my volunteer work, my first opening into the idea of having a forum for women to support women was at an international conference in Chicago in 2017. And it was really fascinating to get perspectives from women from literally across the globe. And it was encouraging to see how much advancement had been made in some actual first circles. And it was disheartening to see how many of the women had the same challenges as I had. And I've taken that when I joined Buck back in 2015 and became part of the leadership team. I realized that everyone at that time, conference calls were a thing. You can remember back in the day before Zoom, everyone knew when I joined the call because I would be the only female voice on the call. And that's when I knew there was a problem. And I became committed at that point and have been working on that since then to create more female leaders, both within my company, but within the profession overall, doing work with the International Actuarial Association, partnering with the very mighty Kathy Lynn from the Caribbean Actuarial Association. Don't know if she's joined us today. And Roseanne Harris, president-elect for that, and just making a really big push to get women connected and educated. I think back what I didn't know when I started in this industry and what I wish I'd known. And I'm hoping to kind of share that with other people. I do remember, sadly, Rae, the first time I was asked to be a panelist, I was organizing a forum and the planners were like, and now we need an older experienced female to talk about her perspective. And I'm like, yeah, where are we going to find her? And then I noticed it was awkwardly people were looking at me. So I was like, okay. So maybe I'm at the point where I need to start really proactively giving back. And I hope to do a little bit of that today, but I also expect to learn a lot from my co-panelists as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tonya. And last but certainly not least, Mallika.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Mallika Bender. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society. I've been in the profession for 14 years now, 12 of which were in traditional actuarial roles in insurance and consulting. I spent most of my career in the US, but I also worked for a few years in Sydney, Australia. And I currently work for the Casualty Actuarial Society as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Staff Actuary, which is a really exciting role, something that I'm so happy to be doing now. And, you know, this type of event is wonderful to see happening, and I'm so glad to be able to support NAWA. And I know that there's a need for NAWA because, frankly, a lot of women actuaries have asked me for this group for years now. Before taking on this role, I led a lot of the DE&I efforts for the CAS as a volunteer. And I also got to attend a women's actuarial group, a smaller group that was formed within one company a couple of times when they had some meetings. And both of those times, the people that attended that meeting came up to me at the end and said, well, does a group like this exist, you know, broader than this company, and how can we get involved? And, you know, at the time I said, I don't know of anything. I think what you all are doing here is great. And I'll keep you informed if I do. But, you know, I think it is really interesting, as other people have already said, that it's 2021 and only just now are we really forming this group. The other reason that I think NAWA is needed is something that Amber pointed out in that data. Learning that not only are women only about 30 or 35% of the actuarial profession right now, but that this upward trend that was happening for a long time really stopped about 15 years ago. So we haven't really made much progress in a time when I think we should have. And that's why I think NAWA can helped tremendously is just to get that ball rolling, get that trend moving again. And even if NAWA focuses only on leadership and advancement of women who are already in the profession, those efforts have trickle down effects, right? So I think that we'll see the efforts of NAWA being really important for the pipeline as well in the future.
Thanks, Mallika. And thanks, everyone. It was great to hear the perspectives on the need for an organization like NAWA. Now let's talk about the need for allies, right, as well. So I'm wondering if you could share a personal example of a time when you didn't have an ally, but you really wished you would have, and maybe what an ally could have done to help. So Mallika, I'll throw this one back to you. Would you be willing to share an example?
Yeah, so this is a time when I was in a mid-level actuarial role, and I was working on a pretty high-profile project. It was a cross-functional project for the company, a really challenging one where a lot of people had a big stake in the final results. And leadership was really pushing us as a team, as the actuarial team, as the project team, to deliver results in a short amount of time and kind of deliver the best results that we could. And sometimes that push was in a quite adversarial way, which was really hard, I'm not going to lie. And I do want to say that I feel like I had a lot of what I would call supporters or supportive allies at that time, like within the project team, within my department as a whole. And that having that support and those people who, cheered you on really did help get through a lot of the challenging times, but it was still a really tough project, right? And there was one day when we had a series of meetings that really didn't go well. And I went in, I was asked by one of the senior leaders to come and talk about, what we could do better for the future. And I went and spoke to this person, shared some of my frustration, and also just said, I wish that we had more senior leadership involved and leading us, so that people at my level, the mid-level, could hold our own, I guess, with some of the other more senior people that were in the room. And this person just really didn't like that. Really didn't like me telling the truth. And responded in a very aggressive, somewhat intimidating way, to the point where I actually stood up and said, I don't have to take this. I can walk out right now. And when I did walk out, I felt like I needed to go and tell my manager and my colleagues, something happened and I didn't feel good about this. I didn't feel safe, and I felt like this wasn't the right team for me anymore. That's how strongly I felt about it. And I kind of felt like I just made an enemy. When I shared that story with a lot of people, including some of my other leaders, I think they all tried their best to sort of make something happen, to, tell that person it was inappropriate, make me feel better. But I don't think that those people really knew how to use their power or their influence in the positions that they had to actually begin to change some of the problematic dynamics that were happening on that project and at that time. They didn't really know where to start, right? And so at the time, I felt like I didn't have the right ally for what I needed to deal with that one event. But now looking back on it, when I was thinking about it for this session, what I really think was happening was that the people at my level didn't really have a senior enough ally present throughout that whole project, right? To be the one to sort of hold their own and spar with the other folks, and be that foundation that we needed. And so, even when you're a star and you feel like you're doing great work and like everybody thinks you're doing a good job, sometimes you just need that extra level of power and influence and support to give you credibility and to make things happen. And if you don't have that, you can't win, right? And so that's where I really wished that the people who had the power and the influence could have been there throughout to help out. And that was what was missing for me. And I think those people existed, but they didn't really know that that's what they had and that's what they could do at the time. You're still on mute, Rae.
Sorry. Thanks, Mallika. I appreciate you sharing that. Tonya, how about you? Was there a time when you didn't have an ally that could have benefited from one?
Yes, there actually was. I had, my career started out when I started in the actual profession was almost by accident. I got my first job without any exams or really any desire to be an actuary, but I answered a want ad and it said, we'll hire math majors. And then I was like, oh, it's an actuaries thing. Okay, I'll take those exams. So I was clearly not committed. I wasn't very serious about the profession. But once I came on board, I became very much in love with the profession. And of course, went on to get my fellowship. And for the first company I worked with, it ended up becoming a global organization. And I was very thrilled to become their chief actuary when I was a little bit young and was the only female in that type of role at any of the large firms in the US. So I was like, this is awesome. And with that came my expectation that there would be a promotion to what was our highest level of officer at, without being in the executive level. I did have perspective, right? But it was the higher level, the next level, we could say. And as it was, while I had an ally who was very much in my corner and recognized my potential, appreciated it, and helped me get the chief actuary role, it was not the case at the executive level where at the time the decision of who would be promoted was made. It was made by someone who actually hired me many years back with a certain impression and understanding of who I was, and probably still have that same impression. So I was trying to be recognized for what I had developed and the skills I had, and I was still being seen as that young woman who was very unfocused and probably a lot of other things. So it was really unfortunate. I learned early that it's important to have allies who support you, who have direct influence on your day-to-day job, who have influence on your promotions. But it's very important to have an ally at even the senior levels of your company, and that's really hard to do. And one of the things I like to promote with the women I work with at Buck is to get visibility. So you're not just visible to your manager and your team, and they know you're great, but make sure you have that broader visibility and understanding of who you are and what you can bring and how you've developed into whomever you are as a leader. I will say that the following year, they changed the process where you had to go through an interview with a panel, and it was a much more, I would say, proper approach to and more objective approach to determining who got promoted. And that worked into my advantage. So it worked out in the following year. But it was a really disappointing and eye-opening time for me that I kind of understood this sense of need for allies and people who support you and who recognize who you are and recognize who you've become, and also who you can be, and that type of thing. So thank you for letting me share.
Yeah, thanks, Tonya. I think both you and Mallika's stories kind of highlight the importance of having an ally that can use that privilege and influence, right, to help those without it. So let's shift gears a little bit and just talk about some examples of allyship. So looking to the panel to share some examples of when someone was an ally for you or how you have been an ally for someone else. And Ari, let's start with you on this one.
Thanks, Rae. Part of my own history is somewhat drives my, not just personal, but family history is what drives some of where trying to hope and pay things forward a little bit in the industry. But I'll reflect back on, rewind the tape, although tapes don't exist anymore. Well, we'll rewind it 50 plus years when my dad was, this is in late 60s, if I remember right. He was in optometry school in Chicago. No, he's immigrant family, grew up in the projects. They didn't have money. He couldn't stay on campus. There was just no money. And the only goal in the family was get out of the projects. Like, you need to do what you can. So education was important. He was in optometry school in Chicago, and he traditional Sabbath observer. So he was not going to be driving or taking classes on Saturdays. He had one teacher who would only hold classes on Saturdays, which was fair. That's how the school ran. He didn't live on campus. He could not afford to. He stayed at family members or distant cousins 5 miles away. And he basically walked every week, which isn't, uphill both ways in the snow, right? But actually in Chicago, 5 miles downtown in February is not fun. But he did it, no problem. The big challenge was when tests were assigned and he had to go through, and teacher would absolutely not allow for any form of accommodation. What's interesting in this process was that the class president actually advocated for him and said, let him stay in the dorm, let him take my spot, I'll stay off campus so we could do a swap, which was a really endearing effort, which was not allowed. He said, not paying, can't go. And for whatever reason, the dean didn't like it. The dean was clearly very involved. So anyway, but he tried, but it was actually, so they didn't get anywhere. But those actions ultimately got it to one of the visiting professors who was not Jewish by background, didn't have much exposure to it, even from where he grew up. It really wasn't very much a part of his thought process, but it caught his attention, who had my father in a different class, who ultimately went and basically took the dean head on and said, you can't do this to your students. You got to find a balance. And he said, I'll take the test. I'll proctor it for him. I'll be there to make sure nothing goes wrong. I'll help out. And the long story, or the short story is, that helped. The longer story is that didn't happen until his second semester. He failed that class. He had to repeat it. No idea how he's going to get through. And that always stuck in my mind, where it's like, hey, there's people who advocate for us or for me or for my family. And I don't know why. It took me a long time till it kind of hit me where it's, am I Dr. Ott for others? Shouldn't I be doing that also? And it was, how do I pay it forward? And again, better late than never. But I think that level of allyship in that story, it's always stuck around from a family standpoint. And there's really two main lessons with that. There's the class president who advocated and was vocal as an ally and was unsuccessful from what it seems. But we have to remember that it maybe took 6 months later, but it elevated to the attention of someone else who was in a position of power. And that person who was in a position of power was able to advocate a little bit further on. So you never know where your efforts end up. Sometimes from an allyship standpoint, you try to do things, you think it falls on deaf ears. You never know when it comes through. So that's always been one of the inspiring parts to me, where it's just, there's a lot of people could do just by being vocal a little bit. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It ultimately has an impact. So, just sharing my family story there.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. It's a great example of the impact allyship can have. Yvonne, can you share an example of allyship from your experience?
Yes, actually, I do have two examples. So the first is from interactions with cisgender Caucasian male boss. And actually, I had the privilege of working under two in particular who thankfully were used to working with people from different cultures and advocated for me and would push me to do things that I may have otherwise shied away from. And more importantly, they made me feel comfortable in the team and like I was part of the team. And that's not something I can say for many teams I've been in. And, as somebody from a minority group or less represented group, you notice when some, people seem to think of you as alien or you have nothing in common, and they just, the interactions with you just seem like you need to be tolerated instead of appreciated. But these managers definitely knew, either from experience or training, I'm not sure exactly where they got it from, but they knew that this wasn't the way you needed to go. And you actually needed to, when you have people from culturally diverse backgrounds, you need to be intentional about how you're interacting with them. And also with women, you have to be intentional about how you're interacting with them. But one of them specifically, he had recommended me for a promotion when he was leaving the company, and he faced a lot of pushback for it. People would say, well, I don't know, is Yvonne really the right person for the job? But, he pushed back and kept telling them she is, and this is why, she is, and this is why. And, how do I know this? Afterwards, he did come to me and say, tell me that he had confidence that I could do the job, and he provided support. And he had said, well, if I need anything while he's away, he'll support me. And even after the fact, a couple of people actually, once they got to know me, they actually admitted to me that they initially weren't convinced, but after they'd gotten to know me, they really now understand what he was talking about. But if you think about that's really stemming from people not knowing me or trying to get to know me because it was harder for them or because they found it awkward. And really, when you're in a position of influence or power, it's important to realize that our biases really affect how we view people. And in turn, that affects whether or not we even bother to get to know these people. And then in turn, that affects how you will view them. So it's a vicious cycle, and it can only be broken if you check yourself and check your biases and get out of your comfort zone to get to know people who don't remind you of yourself, particularly if you're in a position of influence. And if you are already woke, like my two managers were, use your voice to influence those that don't have that, or even those that are shy, because that's some of what they did for me as well. The second example that I have, it's actually something that someone did for me that may sound very simple on the surface, but it made a world of difference to me, So this specific incident, like we had a mix and mingle between the actuarial teams from two different offices of the company that I worked in at the time. And my team were visitors, and we arrived early to the location. And we were, as you do in a mix and mingle, we're standing around with drinks in our hand, chatting to each other in circular groups. And then the other team arrived, and one guy he entered our circle, he entered into the group and proceeded with introductions. So he introduced himself to the people over here, introduced himself to the person on my left, skipped me, and then introduced himself to the person on my right. And then he was done with his introductions. And I must say that I was the only Black person there. I wasn't the only woman, and I wasn't the only young person, but I was the only Black person. And I stood there a bit in shock, and I didn't know what to do. I was asking myself, should I speak up? But if I do, will I then be looked at as the angry Black woman? Like, how am I going to approach this? I was there just thinking. It seemed like forever thinking. But thankfully, my manager, she was there, and she noticed what happened. And she swooped in graciously and just said, "And this is Yvonne." And then she gestured to him to shake my hand. So, again, that might seem like a small thing, but the impact that had on me was huge, and it probably set the tone for the rest of the day. And it's just a simple example of how someone was alert to what was going on and reacted. So she noticed, and she did something. It was really small. It wasn't even, but it had such a huge impact. So I'm really grateful for what she did, and I think it's a clear example of how you can be an effective ally in even small things.
Yeah, that's a great example of how just, every day stepping in when you see some bias can have a big impact on somebody. So thanks for sharing, Yvonne. And people are in all different stages of their allyship journey, and some people may even be unsure of the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So how would you all respond to those who might dismiss the benefits of having a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace? And Tonya, I'll put this question to you first.
Wow. That comes up quite a bit, right? As I mentioned, I've been very much involved in trying to move the needle on our profession, both within my company, within the associations I volunteer with, such as a Conference of Consulting Actuaries with their community, with NAWA, with the Society of Actuaries and CAS, and also internationally. So there's been a lot of conversations, and because of the makeup of our profession, and particularly of the leadership in our profession, is often with men. And they tend to have the reaction of, if they are receptive, many of them are receptive because they're like, well, Tonya, it's the right thing to do. Won't that be nice of us if we're very inclusive and we invite these other folks in to have a vice chair role, or something like that? So they see, they look at it as a visual way to check a box and say, oh, look at that, we did something nice and we feel so good. And that's when I like to hit them with data. I love to research and look into information and understand the sociology of it all, and just the way that people make decisions and how they make better teams. I've always thought in my head that if you are in a group and no one disagrees with you and you make a decision in a very short period of time, then you have the wrong group, and they are not diverse enough, and they're not thinking differently than you, and you probably have failed in your group composition or the way that you've made people feel safe in sharing that. But diverse teams, if you can find plenty of research about why that matters and how it actually can influence it, but you make better decisions 87% of the time, according to research. And if you are presented with more options, you're more often going to make a better decision. So there's a lot on the table with this diversity of thought, getting back to the webinar series that Kathy Lynn has been promoting and supporting. There's a lot of value to that. You're just better as an association, and you're going to make better decisions, and you're going to be able to lead the profession overall. I feel really strongly about this. And as actuaries, we are fortunate that they are analytical after all. So if you provide them with some data and some understanding about the advantages outside of feeling good about what you have just done, or that, oh, look at us, we're inclusive because we're global, but really understand that it's that diversity of perspectives and not just having the look of diversity, but the inclusiveness in both your leadership and your decision-making, you become so much more powerful, you become so much more successful as an organization, association, or any group.
Yeah, thanks, Tonya. Some really good points. And Mallika, I'll turn it over to you. How do you respond when someone is dismissive of the benefits of DEI work?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of the stats that people use, I think, are really important, like those innovation benefits and things that Tonya mentioned. But I was thinking about like why diversity and inclusion work is important to me. And sometimes it goes back to just the selfish reasons of like, when I feel different, I want that to be normal and I want it to be okay and something that I can still succeed even though I'm different. And I think sometimes people dismiss diversity, equity, and inclusion because they don't really see how it benefits them directly. Or worse, they actually feel like they're excluded when diversity, equity, and inclusion activities are going on because they don't happen to be the kind of different that we're talking about today, whatever that may be. But in reality, those people have also experienced challenges, either in their past life or even today. They're experiencing challenges that are similar to some of the challenges that the most marginalized people that we always talk about with diversity and inclusion efforts have also experienced. So I think that one of the ways to address this is to start to express how those people that feel excluded or that DE&I is not for them, how they could have benefited or could still benefit today from changes that help other people besides them. And I think that since we're talking about, women and allies, this is a really good spot for allies to jump in, to be the ones that express that to the the non-believers, let's call them. So for example, if we're doing work around diversity, equity, and inclusion to address the career development gap that a lot of women actuaries experience when they have children or go on maternity leave and take time off. Some of the changes that arise from doing those DE&I efforts are going to benefit male colleagues as well, right? Like men have children too at home, and men want to take care of their children and be there for their children as well. So, when we start to encourage all parents to take parental leave around the birth or adoption of a child, or create a culture shift that allows people to adjust their schedules to deal with their families, that doesn't just benefit women, although maybe women asked for it, or maybe women were complaining more about it. It really benefits everyone. And a lot of men struggle with those issues too. And it's not acknowledged as much as it is for women. And men could feel empowered to take on more of the caregiver roles at home if their expectations at work were changed. So, and to the extent that allies can make that point, sometimes it comes across a little bit more easily. It's easier to digest. So I think that's a great way for, an ally to get involved. But just knowing that all of these efforts really do benefit many, many people and benefit everyone sometimes, even if it seems that they're directed towards a certain group or a certain subset of your team.
Yeah, thanks, Mallika. Those are some great approaches to tackling the pushback, both from the side of how it impacts the business and then also how it impacts the employees, right? So since we brought up this topic, we wanted to take a minute to walk through some of the tangible benefits that diversity, equity, and inclusion have on businesses. And because we know this particular audience will appreciate it, we're going to add in some relevant data as well. So here I've just broken the benefits into 4 main categories. I'll start on the top left and kind of work my way around. So first, diversity, equity, and inclusion benefits the bottom line. According to a study by McKinsey, companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above their respective national industry medians. And companies in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely. A more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplace allows you to access and retain top talent. According to Glassdoor, 67% of employees consider diversity when seeking employment. And additionally, a Limeade Institute study revealed that when employees feel included, they are 3 times more likely to stay and 51% more likely to recommend their place of work. Engagement and productivity are also increased in a diverse and inclusive workforce. So Glassdoor reports that when companies support diversity and inclusion initiatives, 83% of millennials are actively engaged in their work. And we know that highly engaged employees tend to go the extra mile and work harder for the organization. And then finally, diversity powers innovation. The Boston Consulting Group found a statistically significant relationship between diversity and innovation outcomes, with each of the 6 dimensions of diversity being correlated with innovation. So we've talked about how allyship is essential to a more inclusive and equitable workplace. And we've also talked some about how such a workplace that's more inclusive and equitable has material benefits both to the employees and the company. So I want to go back to the panel now with a final question here. So I wonder if you guys could share some tips on how you advocate for the underrepresented and be a more effective ally. So these could include things like articles or books for continued learning, as well as just everyday actions that allies can take. And Yvonne, I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rae. I mean, I think you pointed out some really good tools early in the presentation, and I do encourage people to look at those. I think leanin.org is a really good tool. I personally don't read that much, so I am don't read books. I do read other things, so I'm going to try and just lean on personal examples. I guess on a personal level, what you could do to be a more effective ally, you could just make sure you get out of your comfort zone, because things aren't going to change. It's actually, these things like this aren't easy and they don't come naturally. So you actually have to be intentional. So make sure you get out of your comfort zone. Try to interact with people that are different from you or from underrepresented groups. I mean, even traveling alone helps, because it helps you to see different cultures and see like traveling out of the country. It helps you see different cultures and interact with people from elsewhere, and maybe understand why some people are confused, like they don't know the difference between like saying he or she, because in their culture everyone's a they, or something like that. And also just think about what it could, what it would be like if you were in the shoes of people that you work with that are underrepresented. And I know it might be awkward or uncomfortable at first, but just try to get to know them. Small things like asking them what do they do outside of work, just to make chat. I mean, that's a very simple, bland question, but that helps just to try and get to know them a bit more. Ask them, for example, after you've been into a meeting, if they had any thoughts on the last meeting you were in, just to, just have that talk with them. I think a lot of it comes from understanding people and getting to know people. Then you're able to better know what it's like in their shoes, and you're more likely to stand up for them when something comes up. And I think on a business level, like if you do have that influence in your company, or your company has suggestion boxes or something, try to get your company to think about underrepresented groups more and address biases and inequalities head on, because these aren't things that, again, they don't just go away and you can't just sweep them under the rug. To try and address them head on, you have to be intentional. And a lot of companies have actually started doing that, which I think is great. But I do think one thing some companies have started doing is trying to ensure that there's someone from a specific underrepresented group in each task force, for example. And, like Tonya gave her example, of saying, oh, they want a specific speaker, and she didn't know they meant her. But so the people have been doing that a lot, and it seems like a great initiative, and we're glad that people are paying attention. But it is important to realize that sometimes you're putting more pressure on few individuals to form these groups or to join these groups. So you're essentially getting them to do more extracurricular activities that are adding to their stress load. And maybe that's not necessarily the approach you should take. A better approach may be to give the teams or the task forces themselves a mandate to think about this. Make sure you're thinking about it when you're doing this project. You can maybe talk to people in these groups and ask them for advice, but maybe not necessarily ask them to join the team. And what might also help is try and have a one-to-one conversation with someone from or people from the group that you are trying to target, and ask them, okay, first of all, do they want to join the group? A task force. They might say yes or no, so Tonya might have responded better to that situation she gave us if someone spoke to her before, not just expecting her to raise her hand. So I think it's important to just have those conversations, even ask them what do they think are good ideas to implement in the company or to increase representation. So I mean, I think, yeah, it's a better approach to try and do that rather than trying to get people to be inserted into every single thing, because especially when you have very few of them in the corporation, you're just going to add to their stress and probably contribute to burnout. And then also, I think if you're a leader in the organization or someone that people look up to, you have to, again, try to be intentional. I think that's what I've said each time. Try to be intentional about what you're doing and saying to help encourage people to bring their whole selves to work and to feel included. And also trying to help normalize things that should be normalized but aren't, or that people find different or strange. Like, for example, a personal example as well. So I think many people might be aware of the struggles of Black women, particularly in the US, in terms of their hair, and how many people have changed their hair to conform to a business environment, like straightening it chemically and only doing certain hairstyles. I was one of those people that used to do that and always felt the need to conform. And then as I matured, I broke out of my shell and moved to display my hair in its natural state. And I've even gone further to now I always wear my hair in a short afro, because I want to normalize looking or being different. Like, I know people look up to me. I know people see in the organization. They see me in the organization. So, why don't they just see me with red hair, with red afro? The color of my hair does not affect how good an actuary I am. So, why can't I just be an example and normalize that, and go out of my way to do things like that? So I think those are a few things that you could do.
Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. Those are some great tips. Ari, what are your tips for being an effective ally?
Yeah, happy to share. I do come from the position of a little bit of a privilege when it comes to advocating specifically for women, that I'm not one. People aren't automatically assuming, oh, this is because of self-advocacy. And this goes back to the prior question as well. How do you respond to naysayers? Some people, what they try to do, it's not fighting the stats or the facts on it. I think there's very few people who have shown studies that said, see, diversity is bad. I'm still waiting to find that conversation. I think that'll be an exciting one. But more, it's people undermining reasons or motivations. And it's, well, you're doing this for self-advocacy, so you're just trying to protect yourself. I don't get that as much. I do get people saying, well, you do that because you have daughters. And it's like, well, I also have a son, and I have sisters and a mother. And I don't know, I think if you do the math, a lot of people have women in their family somewhere. So I don't think that argument holds up very well. This is a people problem, not a woman problem. And I keep getting back to that aspect of it, and that helps them brighten the conversation or broaden the conversation. I mean, so some of the tips that I think I could add a little bit, and again, sharing that I'm still on my journey personally. It took a while for me to get the courage to recognize I might have a platform and ability of influencing. And it took me a while to get there. Part of it was elevating in a company, recognizing now that I am in a hiring position, I'm in a talent development position, I'm in a personnel management position. Part of it was recognizing that. And, this is in light of taking advantage of a platform and using it. It does still take courage because some people think there's a risk. I thought that way. Well, I don't want to voice about this because then, it's a little awkward if you're going to pick up the phone and call the CEO and try to make a complaint. Now, I'm not saying that can happen, but should be allowed. I had a conversation with the CEO in the hallway once about this, and I brought something up along those lines. It was a great conversation. He was open to it. First thing I'll tell everybody when it comes to advocating an allyship, I think people are more open and receptive to hearing it than you might have in your mind. And I think the risk of it's not 100%, but I think there's a lot of people who are open to it, and the ones who are anti, I think many of them are going to just be quiet, not go and fight one. So when you think about the risks balance, I don't view it as big of a risk. I think it's important to do that. People are being open, people be receptive. You have to do it smart. You have to know how to talk to people, but people are open to the conversation, especially when you bring it up just as a conversation or an idea. People are more receptive to it. And if, developing that courage, I think maybe there's like two motivational parts that could help. One is that you could just say, I have to go to sleep at night comfortable that I did something right today. That's great, and maybe an altruistic view of it. But you could also very simply say, this is actually good for everybody. You could do it selfishly too. I think that's where we get to people saying, well, you're just self-advocating. Yeah, but it's self-advocacy that benefits the company and benefits other people. Where's the downside of that? So I think recognizing it, it does take courage. I do think it does, for me, certainly part of that journey was developing that courage to be more outspoken about it and more about advocacy. People will listen. And again, if they judge your motivations, that's okay. And frankly, the ones who won't listen, I don't know if you're going to convince everybody. You can't view this as all or nothing. Things move over time.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. And thanks to the whole panel for sharing your stories today. But now we want to give those of you in the audience a chance to ask your questions. So there's a couple ways you can do that. You can put your questions in the chat, just typing them in, or you can raise your hand if you'd like to ask the question by going to the reactions button in the bottom right and then clicking on the raise hand button. So while we're gathering those questions, I'll start off with one I'm particularly curious about, which is, what are some ways that you have been successful at engaging male allies to take a more active role? And I know, Ari, you kind of started to touch on this earlier, but anyone else in the panel have some thoughts? Mallika?
Yeah, actually, Ari said something that really stuck with me, right? He said he's still on his journey and he's still learning. And I think there are a lot of people who are allies or thinking of themselves as allies now who would feel the same way and want to learn, want to grow and practice their allyship. And we are all learning. Like, I don't always know either. I don't always even know what I need from an ally. But I think what I'm trying to do is ask my allies to do stuff more for me and think about, like, what do I really need from somebody who has different power and different resources than me? And who do I know who has those things and would be willing to help? And then have that conversation and just say, I need an ally right now. And I was hoping that you might be that person, and then start the conversation from there. I think that we kind of have to guide each other through all of this. And that what I think I need from an ally could change over time as well, because the situation changes, or just as you think about a problem more, it becomes clearer. So be okay with asking and just being vulnerable and saying, I need someone right now. I think this is what I need, but I also just want to talk to you about it more and work on it together, and ask what they can do or say what you think you need right now. And hopefully that helps, and people take the opportunity to practice their allyship. It could take a few tries, but it's a good start.
Yeah, thanks, Mallika. All right, so another question is, what are some of the barriers you'll have encountered when trying to create a more inclusive environment, and how did you address them?
I'm sorry, Ray, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so what are some of the barriers that you may have encountered when you're trying to create a more diverse and inclusive environment, and how did you address them or deal with them?
I've had well, one of the issues I get a lot when we're trying to look at leaders or new people for roles is oftentimes what's brought up is the lack of experience, and that someone might bring, or they look at them and say, well, they don't have the right experience. And I ask, well, how did you find your candidates? Or they pick someone and that person isn't really representative of diversity. And you might say, well, why did you pick that person? And they'll say, well, we looked at the person who had the most experience, and we went to our usual resources, and they defend a lot of times the status quo is perpetual, and you look at people who've had the opportunities because the opportunities were made available in a time that kind of feeds on itself in this cycle, and trying to challenge those situations is difficult, and you have to be, I like the word Yvonne keeps saying, intentional, and as Ari says, you have to be brave, and you have to say, no, just because they don't have the experience doesn't mean they don't have the potential, and if they didn't come from this school or have this prior role doesn't mean that they're not the right person. But I hear that a lot where, well, she doesn't have that experience, or that's quite difficult. And also another favorite response, especially with women, is, well, she's just too emotional. She's just too, yeah, Yvonne smiling. Heard that, Yvonne? She's just too emotional. And I think that trying to both coach women that they need to express their emotions in a certain way, this is true in a business manner for fact, but also men need to understand how to deal with those emotions, because that isn't always part of the culture, right? And you have to get and be very forward and say, yes, there's emotion there, but that emotion is passion. It's just being expressed in a way that maybe you're not used to or comfortable with. So it's just some of my random thoughts there, right?
Yeah, thanks for some good examples. I think someone raised their hand. Question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Koshika Harrison. Nice to see all of you. Thank you so much. It's been, I'm really enjoying this content, especially the panel. And I think it's brave for you all to share all of these stories. And I think my question, it's maybe a comment or discussion point, but Mallika was talking about her story where she kind of got let down from speaking up about how she felt about something. And I thought that was really brave to do that. And also just the choice of whether to be an ally and acknowledge the fact that not everybody's going to be on your side. So what I'm getting at is, in this journey to change the way things are, we are going to not always win, and basically, people won't agree. And that kind of comes with some introspection where you have to really be sure that you're right, and being like on this journey where you're still trying to figure out, like, is this a good mission? Like, do I belong? Am I worthy? When you do encounter things like this, which shake you, and you see like, oh, well, I asked for help. It took a lot of courage to ask for help, but I got turned down or criticized, or somehow I feel that something's wrong with me. What do you do at that point to kind of regain your strength and confidence? Do you like reach out to friends? What do you do next to kind of reground yourself and still stay strong instead of be weakened by things like that?
I can answer, right? If you like. I've had that happen to me, and you get discouraged. I like to say I go to my tribe. I have, in addition to trying to have allies within my job and all of this, I have a group of women that I am very close friends with who work in the same industry, but not at the same company. And we are very supportive of each other. And if something stinks or something frustrates me, or I forget the value I have because someone isn't reflecting or appreciating that, I go to my tribe and they talk to me and they give me honest feedback. And you're like, well, maybe you didn't handle that. However, but they can kind of give you that honest feedback and give you that reflection and remind you, who you are and how you got there. And it's really important for women to have that, I think. Ari, you can tell me it's the same for men, but just having that group of women who will be very honest with you, but also very supportive of you, even outside of your work environment. I think it's really important because they can listen to you and give you that feedback and that support you need when you may not be comfortable getting that within your official work. Just a thought.
Tonya, it is the same, just for the record. Everyone needs their support circles. They're different places for sure. If I could, Kashika, good seeing you again. Just, a quick thing that you said there that kind of popped in my mind. And you're talking about, we're trying to make change. We're all trying to make a change. I think one of and this goes back to an earlier question of what do you do when there's a naysayer or you face, some of what I like doing is trying to present this people as not making change and changing the way things are. I'd like to have people just embrace the way things are a little bit. And by that, what I mean is a lot of people, when you go and say, well, you have biases, I want to change that. They react with it. You're trying to change me. That's accusatory. And that's where sometimes the conversations go a little awry. Sometimes one of the avenues I've taken with different aspects within the company anyway has been, a poll. How many people think they're biased? And we could do this right now with the 200 plus people on the call or however many are on. If the percentage is less than 100%, that means someone needs to do some introspection. We as a species, we are all biased, some positive, some negative, whatever they are. And when I say embrace that, that's what I'm talking about. We just need to know that that's how we're wired. We function with heuristics and we need to question that. And everybody's self-checking. And then it's no longer, that takes the edge off of I'm trying to change you. I'm not trying to change anybody. I'm trying to create maybe a more reflective environment. And people take a little bit of a different angle sometimes. And I've had some success. I should say I've had some success with that. Some people, it's like, that's too theoretical. And sometimes it's hard for people to embrace their own biases, but it's looking in the mirror. We all have it. Every one of us here, everyone everywhere. It's just a fact of life. But it's always about counterbalancing that. And Tonya, to your point, that's what you have. Your tribe was able to question you. It's because they're coming from a different perspective. I mean, that is the value of diversity. It's people with it, not the way you're stuck in a way of thinking. And that you're in a zone where they could question you. So sometimes reframing it a little bit. I know, Kashika, I'm just saying like a general comment, not so much about how to repower yourself after an event, but some of it's calibrating and it goes back, okay, could I have done it a little differently? And maybe that'll help for the next conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks.
And also, if I could just add, don't forget your woosah moments. I don't know if you guys have watched, I think it's Bad Boys where they're woosah, so don't forget to have those moments where if you need to leave and go take a walk and breathe and think about what's happening, take it. If you need that moment, take it. You might not get to your tribe just yet, but just take that moment or just go into the bathroom and woosah, whatever you need to do. But I think it's important to stop and have your woosah moments.
All right, Yvonne, I'm going to Google that later. Thank you.
I know probably didn't mean for every single person to answer this question, but I'll just add one more perspective, which is like, I think it's also okay to be done with it for a while and say, I've been fighting this fight or trying to make change or trying to embrace change for X amount of time. I've depleted my own resources doing this and I don't have any more to give, or I have this much left to give, but the fight takes this much, right? And to recognize that and say, this isn't for me anymore is also a valid, it's not always the answer, but it could be a valid answer depending on the situation. And, that's a delicate one. Sometimes it feels like you're quitting when you quit or you're a quitter. But it's also about like protecting your own resources, and your tribe can recharge you this much, but you need it to be recharged this much, right? So sometimes you got to get out of that situation, and that's okay. And you have to let yourself do that sometimes. So I think what everyone said is all, I agree with every single person, and just wanted to add that little extra piece. It's okay to just step away or leave or quit sometimes.
Yeah, thanks, Mallika. And so we make it a full round here. I'll have one short comment, which is that I actually did have that experience where I did step away for a couple of years, and then I came back and I was much better and recharged. I just got to the point where I was so depleted and I didn't want to be, was upset about it all the time. So taking that step back did help. All right, we do have a question from the chat asking about recommendations on how a company can hold leadership accountable for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So many mics went off. Well, I was just going to say, I think it goes back to, again, trying to be intentional. So for a company, you have to be intentional. You have to set those goals, targets, measure your senior leadership against those. Make sure, even have workshops to make them aware of biases. I remember I used to work for Travelers specifically. I will say this company specifically, and they had this training that they made everybody go through, which was appreciating differences. So you shouldn't just tolerate differences, you need to appreciate them as well. So I think making sure that you're having training like that through the company, but also have measurable targets that you're measuring your senior leadership against, and asking them specific questions. Like, you have to be intentional. You can't skirt around the issue.
To add to that, Yvonne, is not just to have the training, but it really does start at the top of an organization if you're going to change the culture. So you need to have training specifically for those in the highest level of leadership. You also need to have structure that supports your ambitions for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is something that we are doing at my firm. It can't be a volunteer role to be focused on the Black Leadership Council or any the Women Empowered. Like, those are really important things, but they need to be officially part of people's roles. They can't be an extracurricular activity, because it's a great thing to do. You need to make that part of your structure and part of your accountabilities for individuals, as well as the overall structure of how you're running your company. And I know a lot of people have DE&I officers now. I heard that that was one of the hottest job opportunities now on LinkedIn after all of the events of last year, but it goes beyond that, and making sure that you have people who are specifically accountable and recognizing the structure of your company to move these things forward, and take that training at the very top to set that tone and that understanding, so that they are supported when it gets to the bottom and you have time spent on these particular efforts. That just some more random thoughts to add to what Yvonne said, but it has to be intentional, Yvonne. I'm writing that down too. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll add a real quick. There's a top-down and a bottom-up approach. I think when we think of it very practically, a lot of us on the call here, if not all of us, probably don't have the ability of implementing this as part of CEO compensation or hiring a chief diversity officer, et cetera. And I reflect on a conversation months ago with Matt Gentile with Saga on a similar basis, where there is that bottom up that needs to happen. And I know this might upset maybe some people in the management, but you should try to annoy them as much as possible. And I know this, it sounds a little funny, and I know some people can take it in a funny way, but the more they see the questions from people are coming around diversity, and I don't mean badger. What I mean is that, and just an example, we had Everest had just a quarterly town hall, and what was fantastic, there wasn't any specific topic of DEI within it at that specific session, but during the open Q&A, lots of questions came in about DEI. And that's I mean, I thought that was a fantastic sign, because it means it's not just on people's minds. It means people are vocalizing it. And they weren't aggressive. They were very honest. What are you doing about it? Do you plan on increasing transparency on diversity metrics, etc.? When people see that coming in a flood of questions in a Q&A at a town hall or in a suggestion box, people pick up on the themes. It doesn't make a change right away, but sometimes you just got to keep pushing that. And like I said, you know, don't badger. Badger is different than, but sometimes it means being a little noisy. Ultimately, what happens from that is management starts realizing, no, we need to show people that we're in sync with this. And that's a bit of a motivator for them.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have someone in the audience with a raised hand. Anna?
Hi, thank you. My name is Anna Kupik and I'm from Galecki Search Associates, and I do recruiting in the actuarial space. And I've been a recruiter for over a decade. And obviously as a woman, care a lot about this topic and helping promoting other women in the field. And so I've seen a lot of different things over time when it comes to creating metrics around hiring women and, you know, how people are held to that in recruiting. One of the things, or two of the things I think that we're seeing recently that I'm curious if other people are experiencing in their own organizations, you know, if they're effective, right, is we're seeing that companies are holding both internal and external recruiters to a standard of not only just presenting a male candidate, but making sure there's a qualified female candidate to be presented alongside that male candidate. So that's something new that I hadn't seen in the past as far as companies putting forward and putting that down on paper from an initiative standpoint. And then I've also continued to see that something that I've seen pop up, you know, now and again, which is having certain percentages of women represented in the interview pool. So whether it's like the initial presentation of candidates or before final decisions are made, making sure that there's female candidates represented in that pool. So I'm curious for the panel, have you seen those things in your own organizations? What's your view on them and their effectiveness as far as, you know, promoting women? And then if there's other ideas that you have seen be effective, because we definitely want to play a role in things going in a positive direction. And so we would love to make sure to share with clients what we're seeing that is effective and also helping candidates through that journey as well.
Rae, I'm sensitive. I always go first. But this actually came up earlier today on a call I had with our ERG group, and I was being schooled by Emily Dolan, who was on this attending a minute ago, but she has done some training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and is very interested in getting more involved in the recruiting efforts for my company, Buck. Because she believes that you have to be intentional about where you're recruiting and how you're going about it. It's not just, you know, are you going to the diverse schools to recruit, but are you also asking the right questions and approaching them? And so I have a lot to learn, frankly, myself about how to do a better job of that. But I can tell you it does not happen randomly. You don't just wake up one day and go, oh, look at that. We have diverse employees. I mean, and it's not just metrics, it's how you go about who you're interviewing, what you're looking for, how you're asking the questions, and how you make them comfortable that they will be, you know, successful and included and feel engaged and accepted at your company. It's really hard in the actual profession. There's many ways of looking at diversity, and we don't do well in almost all of them. You're welcome. We are like, we're not number one when you look at all these different measures, and it's really hard. One person on my call this morning mentioned that if you do not have 2 diverse candidates out of the pool that you interview, the odds that a diverse candidate is selected is almost 0. That you have to have at least 2 diverse candidates. You have to be intentional about how you're considering different people. And you know, the actual profession is super hard because we have these check the box. How many exams have you already passed? And you're like, well, I didn't even know what an actuary was when I picked my university. My university didn't know what an actuary was, so I didn't have the courses. I don't have the exam. So you really have to think again, potential versus checking these boxes, and go out and say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make sure that we have these diverse candidates to consider and actually get them in the door Starting with the internships, I'd say, but all throughout. So thanks, Emily, for schooling me this morning so I can know a little bit more on this topic.
Yeah, and the key word there is intentional. That's the key word, intentional. And as Tonya said and mentioned before, like if you don't do that intentionally, you know, you can't say, oh, we want women who have, I don't know, CEO experience when there've been no women CEOs, right? So you can't. You have to be intentional to find ones with the potential to do it. You know, so yeah, it is about, you have to do basically what companies are doing now in making those mandates. You have to do that. There's no other way around it.
And I just wanted to shout out some comments from Jackie Friedland, just the what gets measured gets managed point, which I think is important to repeat. And just like Tonya said, you can't hire women if there are no women in the pool. So it's a good idea to do these things. And then another kind of shout out to Jackie was she mentioned that the International Association of Black Actuaries has this document that they've put out last year, I think now, called employer recommendations for increasing the number of Black actuaries in the US or in North America. And that is an excellent just checklist, basically, of all the things that you can try to do, including, making sure you have a diverse candidate pool. But if anybody on this call hasn't already looked at that, I think that's a great resource. And yeah, all of the other diversity orgs like the Organization of Latino Actuaries has some great points too. And I just think back to, my own experience, kind of following on what Tonya said, that I also didn't know about the actuarial profession until, I read like one line in a book about it. I took one exam and got an entry-level job. But now we're looking at candidates and expecting a lot more of them than was expected of, me 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's not bad. Like the competition is a lot more now, but recognizing that you can succeed in this role if you don't have some of the things on this checklist of items that we used to think, or we currently think are important, is a good first step to, diversifying that pool and knowing that like you succeeded and I succeeded without having 4 exams out of college, so other people can too. And they bring sort of a different viewpoint to the team, which you might need. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. I don't work in a employer of actuaries right now, but I do think that just anecdotally that I've heard that people feel that it does help and it does work to help increase the diversity of the team.
Jump in quick, Anna, thanks for the question. Unequivocally, it does. It impacts, it moves the needle. I've seen it. I do a lot of hiring. We did this years ago. It wasn't even through HR. We did it years ago, just the hiring managers, my group, got together as a group, roundtable discussion. We said, let's mandate a minimum representation at the panel, both between women and people of color. Absolutely move the needle, unequivocally. And the side benefit of it, and it is now a corporate thing. It wasn't just a team. It did have an impact and it trickled down in many ways. The side impact of it is that we now have something explicitly within the hiring guidelines that addresses DEI directly. Because the only other way to do that is, well, either it's a quota, which nobody's doing. So where else do you have in the manual? Everything else is don't ask things that you shouldn't ask. But here it's no, DEI matters. And now that's in the guidelines for how to conduct interviews. It raises the intentionality that people approach when they're interviewing. Again, I would swear by it. I unequivocally this moved the needle.
Hey, Rae, everybody, this is going so well. We were going to stop the questions at 4:40, but we've got another few, and Adrian, Sandy, and I are all sending each other messages. We're happy if this continues on for another 5 minutes, if you guys want to answer some of the other questions.
Okay, yeah, great. So I know we had one question from the chat, someone wanting to hear more about how traditionally feminine characteristics might lend themselves well to leadership roles.
I might start there, contribute there. I think that survey actually that we were talking about earlier, I've forgotten what it's called now, Women in Leadership Survey, I think, it actually does speak to this, and it talks about how women are more likely than men at their levels to take steps to check on their team members and help them manage their workloads. And that's something, that's a good trait that a leader has. And also in the, with respect to COVID and the responses to COVID, I don't know if people have took note, but actually a lot of the countries that did really well, particularly in the beginning in their response, were actually led by women, because they thought, they might think through things differently and might not have an approach. And I know I'm generalizing, but might not have an approach that's so, this is my decision, take it or leave it, sort of thing. So there are definitely traits that women have that are lend themselves to leadership well, and also depends on the type of job you're in. So some people say women are more detail oriented, right? And this might be true. So maybe even in a role where all you do is get to review things at a high level, and but you still need to be able to spot where there are issues. Maybe a woman that is able to spot things quickly would be a great leader in that role. So there actually definitely quite a few things that women in, I'm generalizing because you can't always generalize, but there are there are some traits that women in general are thought to have that do lend themselves well to leadership. And actually people are valuing leaders more that are more in tune to how their employees are treated rather than output. So maybe you might see that traits that women have are going to be valued more in the future.
Yeah, is this question a trap to get us to say what women are like, and then that'll get used against us in the future? No, hopefully not. But this also feels like a little bit scary to say out loud. But I read some research and actually wrote an article at an old job for an ERM blog, Enterprise Risk Management, about how women and men have different sort of risk appetites in terms of whether or not they take risks and what type of risks that they take. And that women, I think, I may not be saying this correctly, but let's say women tend to be more risk averse, right? So they may not want to take risks in the same way, which is not bad or good. But when you have an all male leadership team, that could mean that your team is taking a lot more risks than maybe they should, right? And adding a woman or two women can help to balance that out and generate more of the discussion around, like, is this the right risk to take? Are we balancing the risk reward appropriately? So, that could be another way that just having something that maybe more women are more risk averse could actually be a benefit to a team or a company.
To save you from your discomfort and highlighting how women are different than men, you have to think about we aren't born with a lot of our traits. We are socialized, and women are socialized to be more nurturers and be more collaborative. And well, if we think back, I don't know, the last 20 months, who has been really, really needed? We need a lot of nurturing, right, through this whole pandemic. So I think that's really leaned heavily on some of the leadership skills. Someone said that a study found that 10 of 9 leadership skills, women are tops in 4 or 5 and men the other. But I think you need different leadership skills at different times. And that's why if you have a diverse team, you're able to access those. But I've been on teams that have been mostly men, and I've seen decisions go sideways where they should have taken a much more collaborative approach. And one woman was not enough women to kind of move that to a more appropriate position. But, a lot of times if you have too many women, sometimes you can be overly collaborative and someone needs to, make that decision and move on. It's a generalization, but there is socialization that seeps into who you are and how you've been taught to approach situations. So it's okay that women can have different, quote, leadership skills. I just say we've been socialized to kind of lean heavier in certain directions. So.
Yeah, and just to re-emphasize a point that Tonya just said, I think that is also why it's so important to have diversity in your team, right? In your team, because somebody is going to be able to pick up what someone else does. And then I think someone also put in the chat about how women have 4 of the or 4 to 5 of the top 9 skills, and then men have the other 4 to 5. So you want to balance if you want all of them. So yeah.
Yeah, great points. All right, so I think this will probably be the last question, but it's related to COVID. With COVID happening and many more employees working from home, how do you think this has affected the ability to make connections or find allies, especially if you're like new in the industry or new in the company? Does anyone have any tips on how to kind of find those allies?
I'll jump in with, it's a challenge for sure. I think as much as there's benefits to the work from home or the flex environment that everybody likes, I think we all have to recognize that there are downsides, which means lack of networking ability, lack of side conversations after a meeting, walking back to your desk, lack of just bumping people into a hall and lunches. There are aspects where a work from home environment will limit that networking that I think is a reality, at least in the way we've traditionally worked. I think the more we start getting accustomed, I mean, it's been a year and a half, I still had a hard time getting Zoom set up for this call, right? So I think there's an accustomization aspect that has to kick in. I think this is where it's really important, again, from the advocacy side. People are seeking out to advocate for others and be allies for others. That also goes to companies increasing their resource groups, their networking capability, albeit on a virtual basis. I think it's incumbent on the companies to create those. And again, let's go back to people doing this for selfish or self-advocacy reasons. That's going to create better talent development, better succession planning, better collaboration. Every reason checks the box to do it. So I think some of this is incumbent on companies. It doesn't mean it's without you. I think if you have a talent development program in your company, they usually are going to have some type of mentorship program. Raise your hand, sign up. Whether you have a list of things that you specifically have questions about, it does not matter. Sign up. Get yourself connected to people, try to make it. You have to put yourself out there a little bit. And again, it's incumbent on those who are already networked to also try to reach out to those who you only see on a call once a month, but they're on your team. It's like, maybe you should reach out more and kind of help bring them in. So there's two sides. I do think it takes more energy. And I think some of it's on the company, some of it's on individuals. But I personally don't have like a magic network button that happens. Some of it's really just, sometimes just calling people and asking them a question and let a conversation flow, see what happens. So you could always use the work product as an excuse to develop into a networking side as well. So little tips and tools to try to just push it through. I do believe it is elevated effort though.
Yeah, I think technology is on our side too. I've had folks just reach out to me through LinkedIn, wanting to have some chats, and I've been, when able to do that, I respond. And I've had way more one-on-ones with women in my company than I had back when we just had the conference calls, and it just didn't seem like a thing people would do. You wouldn't set up a meeting with someone unless I happened to be in the office. But now it's just a normal, natural thing. So I actually feel more connected with some of the women that I work with. So technology, I think, in some ways is actually on our side, and COVID opened that up a little bit more oddly in a really, now that I think about it, in a really weird way.
Yeah, and just to add to that, one thing that I've been doing is intentionally having coffees with people. You know, you put it in the calendar, it's our coffee time now. You know, so you just chat. And you know, my company actually, we don't use video that much, but then I insist on using video then, no matter what you're wearing. Yeah, so I think that's important. And then the other thing that I've done is, when I had a new joiner, I tried to mimic what you would normally do by taking them to each person's office and say, this is this person, by doing a similar thing. So during a 5-minute call with somebody, this is this person, you know, so just trying to think differently about what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to all the panelists for being willing to share your experiences and thoughts on this important topic.